A black waiter had been working non-stop since 5 in the morning, hoping to earn enough money to buy medicine for his asthmatic son and extend the rental on their home for a few more days. Suddenly, a simple old man walked in with a grumpy expression that made everyone shake their heads in annoyance, and no one wanted to serve him. The only one who always greeted him warmly was the black waiter, who even paid attention to every detail and remembered all of the old man's habits. Gradually, the old man opened up, and the two grew close like family. But then one day, the old man stopped coming to the cafe. Instead, 2 men in black suits walked in. What they were about to say next would leave the waiter stunned. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The morning began before the sun even considered rising. A faint gray light hovered far out on the horizon, not bright enough to be called dawn, yet just a gentle hint that night would soon give way. The street was still empty, except for a few trash cans lined along the curb and the flicker of a faulty street lamp that blinked off and on in an irregular rhythm. The air carried a thin bite of cold, the kind that slipped through a jacket and settled along the spine. Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of his old sedan with a slow exhale, watching his breath drift upward in a pale ribbon. He rubbed his eyes once, then again, as if trying to push the sleep back into his skull. His hands still hurt from holding the steering wheel too tightly on the drive over. He hadn't even noticed until now. It had been another night of broken rest. Sam had woken up coughing around 1 in the morning, wheezing in that familiar, frightening way. Marcus had sat on the edge of his son's small bed for almost an hour, rubbing his back, waiting for the inhaler to ease the tightness in his chest. When Sam finally relaxed into sleep, Marcus had stayed a few minutes longer, just to make sure. Then he'd laid awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing numbers in his head, until the alarm finally rang. At 4:45 a.m., he pulled his jacket tighter and walked toward Street Cafe, the place he had unlocked 6 mornings a week for about 3 years now. From a distance, the cafe looked like a relic from another era, with its weathered green awning and chipped paint around the window frames. The neon sign on the window, Street Cafe, buzzed and flickered so much that the T sometimes disappeared altogether. This place Marcus often thought was both a prison and a shelter. It trapped him with its low pay and long hours, yet without it, he wouldn't be able to keep Sam clothed, fed, and breathing. He reached the door, pulled out his keyring, and sifted through the jumble of keys that never quite sat in the same order. His fingers felt stiff from the cold. The lock clicked after the 3rd try, and he stepped inside, flipping on the lights. The cafe greeted him with its usual mix of smells, old coffee grounds, a lingering note of frying oil from the day before, and the metallic scent of the griddle that had seen countless breakfasts over the years. It wasn't pleasant, not exactly, but it was familiar in a comforting way, like an aging relative whose quirks you tolerated because they'd always been there. He hung his jacket on the hook by the office door, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. First came the chairs, which he lowered from atop the tables, one by one. The scrape of each wooden leg against the tile echoed softly in the empty room. After that, he filled the coffee machine with fresh grounds, patting the side of the machine like a stubborn dog. It groaned as it turned on, letting out a hiss of steam before settling into a steady rumble. "Don't act up on me today," he muttered. "We've got enough problems." It was a quiet joke, a habit of speaking to appliances and empty spaces, just so the mornings didn't feel so lonely. The coffee machine didn't answer, but it behaved long enough for the first drip of dark liquid to fall into the pot. As Marcus wiped down the counter, he caught himself calculating in his head again. Rent, groceries, Sam's inhaler, refills gas for the car, the overdue electric bill. He pressed a hand to his forehead and closed his eyes for a second. $2,200 a month. 380 short, every single month. He could feel the exhaustion sit heavy in his chest again, like a weight that wouldn't shift no matter how he moved, but there was no time for that now. The clock read 5:27 a.m. The doors opened at 5:30. He took a breath, smoothed his apron, and unlocked the front door. The click echoed through the quiet room, followed by the dull hum of traffic growing outside as early risers started their day. A cold draft swept in the moment he propped the door open, carrying with it the faint sound of a bus engine at the intersection and the scent of wet pavement. Within minutes, the first customers arrived, a couple of construction workers bundled in thick jackets, their boots leaving small trails of dirt on the floor. They nodded at Marcus, who greeted them with a tired but genuine smile. He poured 2 coffees, set them on the counter, and listened to the slow rhythm of the cafe waking up. By 6 o'clock, the cafe's lights felt warmer, the air thicker with the smell of bacon sizzling on the griddle and pancakes browning slowly. Marcus moved from table to table, taking orders, refilling mugs, wiping spills, barely pausing long enough to scratch his nose. His coworkers Tony and Peter arrived around this time, drifting in with the casual ease of people who never opened the place, never handled the worst of the rush alone. Tony immediately tied his apron with a flourish and leaned against the counter. "Morning sunshine," he said, yawning loudly. "Looks like you've already got a crowd." "Yeah," Marcus replied, sliding a plate of eggs to a table. "Same as always." Peter wandered out from the back, chewing the last bite of a pastry he'd claimed before it cooled. He tapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Hey man, I think your grill's running hot." Marcus glanced over. The bacon did look crispier than usual. "I'll adjust it." "Thanks." Neither Tony nor Peter offered help until the first wave had already passed. When they did jump in, it was mostly for simple tasks, ringing up orders, chatting with customers, or handling the easy tables. When a difficult customer walked in, the kind who snapped their fingers or complained loudly, Tony and Peter suddenly became very busy with something in the back. And that meant Marcus got the tables nobody else wanted. Around 7:15, the door chimed again, this time with a quieter, sharper sound, as if the bell itself recognized who was entering. Marcus didn't have to look up to know it was him, Richard Lancaster. He always arrived at exactly 7:15, not a minute early, not a minute late. An older man with a stiff, walk gray hair neatly combed back, and a long coat that seemed one size too heavy for his frame. He carried himself with a sternness that made other customers step aside, though nobody quite knew why. To most people in the cafe, Richard was a grumpy old man who liked his breakfast a certain way and hardly spoke. To Tony and Peter, he was the kind of customer they'd move heaven and earth to avoid. To Marcus, he wasn't sure yet. There was something in Richard's eyes, something lonely, something tired that felt familiar. Today, like every day, Richard walked straight to the corner table near the window, the one with the chipped edge and the uneven leg that wobbled if you leaned too hard on it. Tony nudged Marcus with his elbow. "You want to grab his order? He's looking extra cranky today." "He always looks like that," Peter chimed in, probably born with that expression. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and nodded. "I've got it." He approached the table. The sunlight filtering through the window cast a soft glow on Richard's face, catching the small lines around his eyes and the shadow under his jaw. "Good morning," Marcus said, setting down a glass of water. "Your usual today." Richard barely lifted his eyes. "If I said no, would you believe me?" Marcus cracked a small smile. "Probably not." Richard huffed not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, then gave a short nod. That was as good as permission got with him. Marcus headed to the kitchen, calling out the order over the griddle's hiss. As he stood waiting, his eyes drifted again to the clock. He needed to leave by 2. He always did. And he always felt guilty for the dash he had to make each afternoon, rushing across town to reach Sam's school on time. But there wasn't a choice. When the food was ready, he slid the hot plate onto his arm and brought it over to Richard's table. As carefully as he could, he set it down. The sunlight had shifted, making Richard's face look softer than usual. He reached for his knife to cut his toast, but Marcus noticed his hand trembled slightly, just a faint quiver, barely noticeable, unless you looked closely. Marcus did look closely. Richard paused, stiffened his fingers, then tried again. It took him 2 attempts to cut one slice of bread. Marcus didn't say anything, but he felt something inside his chest tighten. As the morning rolled forward, the scene repeated itself in small ways. Richard quietly eating, Marcus quietly helping other customers, Tony and Peter, trading jokes near the register. The cafe hummed with its usual sounds, the scrape of forks, the sizzle of food, the murmur of conversations, and the steady drip of the coffee machine. But Marcus kept glancing at Richard, watching those trembling hands. By the time the clock neared 8, Richard was almost finished. He folded his newspaper in that precise way he always did, placed it to the side, and reached into his pocket. Marcus hurried over to clear the empty plate. Then he saw it, a single coin on the table. Just one. A quarter. But the way it was placed neatly in the center of the napkin made it feel deliberate, like a small message. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then slid it gently into his pocket. He didn't smile exactly, but something warm moved in him. He whispered almost to himself, "Thanks, Mr. Lancaster." The days followed a similar rhythm. The early mornings, the construction workers, the hum of the city waking up, the financial worry that sat like a stone in Marcus's stomach, Tony's jokes, Peter's complaints, the coffee machine rattling every so often like it was begging for retirement, and always at 7:15, Richard walking through the door. Week after week, Marcus noticed the small changes in the older man's movements. The stiffness in his shoulders, the slower way he sat down, the carefulness with which he held his utensils. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, so subtle that Tony and Peter never noticed at all. But Marcus noticed, maybe because he had watched his own father go through the same thing. Hands that once could fix anything, slowly losing their strength, movements becoming smaller, more cautious. Dad would always laugh it off, Marcus thought sometimes, but I could see it scared him. One morning, after watching Richard struggle longer than usual to cut his toast, Marcus made a quiet decision. The next day, he prepared Richard's plate in the back. Before delivering it, he took the knife and cut the toast into 4 small squares. Perfect squares. Neat, simple. He didn't say anything when he brought it to the table. Richard stared at it for a long moment. His eyes flicked from the plate to Marcus, then back to the plate. "You cut it," he said in a low voice. "Figured it might be easier today," Marcus replied gently. Richard didn't respond, and Marcus didn't wait for one. He simply nodded and moved to another table. It became a ritual after that. Each morning, Marcus pre-cut the toast without being asked, and each morning Richard left a coin, sometimes a quarter, sometimes a dime, once even a silver dollar that looked older than both of them put together. It was never about the money. It was about the intention behind it. A quiet acknowledgement. A thank you spoken without words. One Tuesday morning, Tony leaned over while Marcus was wiping the counter. "You know you don't have to do all that for him," Tony said. "He doesn't tip big. He barely talks. Waste of time if you ask me." Marcus shrugged. "It helps him. Doesn't take much effort." Peter snorted. "Man, you've got a bleeding heart. That old guy won't remember your name in 6 months. Marcus didn't respond. Instead, his eyes drifted again to the corner table where Richard sat, shoulders slightly hunched, staring out the window with an expression that looked less grumpy and more tired, worn. If that were Dad, Marcus thought I'd hope someone would help him too. The thought brought with it a memory his father sitting at the kitchen table late at night rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them from the inside. The old lamp above him gave off a soft yellow light. Marcus must have been around 12, peeking from the hallway. His father whispered, "Just stiff today." That's all, though nobody had asked. The image flickered in Marcus's mind now, like a film reel playing for a moment before vanishing. The next morning, when Marcus set the pre-cut toast in front of Richard, the older man's eyes softened in a way Marcus didn't fully understand yet, and the coin left behind that day was placed even more carefully, right on the crease of the napkin, as if meant to make sure Marcus would see it. One morning, a light snow fell outside the cafe. Tiny flakes tapped softly against the window as the sun rose, barely visible through the thick clouds. The cafe felt warmer than usual, the air thick with steam from the coffee machine and the griddle. Richard arrived with a wool hat pulled low over his ears. It looked like an old hat, maybe one he'd worn for years. He removed it slowly and brushed a few snowflakes from his coat before sitting down. When Marcus delivered the plate, Richard surprised him by speaking first. "You always cut it the same way." Marcus blinked. "I try to. Is it okay?" Richard slid one of the small squares closer, lifted it with a shaky hand, and nodded. "It is." A pause stretched between them, quiet, but not uncomfortable. The clinking of utensils from other tables filled the space. Richard looked at Marcus again. "Nobody else does that." Marcus gave a small shrug. "People deserve help when they need it." Another pause. Richard finally said very softly, "Thank you." The words were so unexpected that for a moment Marcus couldn't respond. He just nodded, pressing his hand flat on the table before moving away. Later, while wiping down the counter, Marcus felt his throat tighten. It wasn't about the toast. It wasn't about the coin. It wasn't even about the words, though they carried a weight that surprised him. It was the realization that this small act of kindness, this simple thing, mattered to someone who didn't seem to matter to anyone else. And maybe in some small way, it mattered back to him too. The days after that felt different, though nothing dramatic changed. Richard still arrived at 7:15. Marcus still cut the toast. The coin still appeared each morning. But there was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond formed, not through conversation, but through routine, through small gestures of care. Still, life outside the cafe didn't get easier. The bills piled up. The bank account grew thinner. Sam's asthma flared more than Marcus liked, especially when the weather turned cold. Some nights, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, staring at overdue notices until his eyes stung. But the memory of Richard's soft thank you lived in his mind, offering a strange comfort he couldn't quite explain. One early morning, while unlocking the cafe, Marcus felt a sudden tremor of fear run through him. He pictured Sam struggling to breathe, the medical bills increasing, the constant pressure closing in. He pressed his hand against the cold metal door, grounding himself. One more day, he thought. Just get through today. When Richard arrived later that morning, Marcus greeted him with a smile that held just a little more warmth than usual. The older man raised his eyes in acknowledgement. His voice was low, almost brittle. "Cold morning," he said. "It is." Marcus replied, "I'll bring your coffee first. It's freezing out." Richard gave the faintest nod, and Marcus turned away, thinking again of his father at the kitchen table, warming his stiff hands. As the cafe filled with familiar noise and warmth, Marcus moved through the morning in steady rhythms. And though he didn't realize it yet, this routine, this small, quiet kindness, was beginning to change the course of his life, setting in motion events he never could have imagined. When he cleared Richard's table that day, he found not one coin but two. He held them in his palm for a long moment, feeling the cool metal warm against his skin. He didn't smile, but inside something softened like the first hint of dawn after a long night. He slipped the coins into his pocket and whispered to himself, "We all do what we can." Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, drifting gently, quietly, like a blessing no one asked for, but still received. And that quiet morning in a small cafe on a tired street, the first thread of a life-changing bond, was quietly sown, one small act of kindness at a time. Understood. I will now continue the story with Act 2, written in the same slow, cinematic, emotionally layered style, approximately 3,804,000 words. Warm, clear American English, rich sensory detail, gentle pacing, every scene dramatized, no summaries. This act will follow your outline: the growing bond, Sam's Saturday visit, Richard's opening up the promise of chess, and the devastating Monday when Richard doesn't arrive. The week rolled in with a stretch of cold mornings that made the sidewalks look slightly glazed at dawn, as if the city had been painted in frost overnight. The air felt sharper than usual when Marcus stepped out of his car on Wednesday. He zipped up his jacket before heading toward the dim glow of Street Cafe's flickering neon sign. Inside, the warmth surrounded him immediately. The soft hiss of the old heating vents, the gentle drip of the coffee machine beginning its morning routine, the faint aroma of detergent from last night's cleaning. Marcus set his keys on the counter and rubbed his hands together, feeling the blood slowly return to his fingertips. He was more tired than usual. Sam had woken twice in the night with a cough that echoed through the apartment like a weak, strained whistle. After giving him the inhaler and rubbing his back, Marcus had sat on the edge of the bed, listening to Sam's breathing, waiting for each inhale to sound less tight. When Sam fell asleep again, Marcus stayed for a while longer, swallowing the familiar knot of worry that always rose during nights like these. He found himself repeating the same thoughts he always did. I need better insurance. I need a better job. I need more hours. I need something. But morning had come anyway, and the world needed him again. By the time the cafe opened its doors at 5:30, Marcus had prepared the usual coffee brewing plates, warming chairs arranged neatly. He took comfort in the routine. It gave his mind something steady to hold on to. The first customers came, and he moved through the familiar rhythm of pouring coffee, taking orders, clearing tables. Tony arrived at 5:55, yawning dramatically, while Peter stumbled in at 6:05 with his jacket half-zipped and a pastry already halfway eaten. Rough night, Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. Stayed up watching that crime series, Peter said. You should see the ending of season 3. Can't, Marcus replied gently. I'm asleep by 9 most nights. Man, Tony said, shaking his head. Your life is depressing. Marcus didn't respond. He focused on sliding a plate of eggs to a waiting customer and kept moving. As the minutes ticked toward 7:15, the atmosphere shifted quiet but perceptible, like the soft pause before a familiar song begins. The door chimed, and Richard walked in. His coat looked heavier than usual, maybe because of the cold, and he moved more slowly, but his eyes had a little more clarity today. He nodded once in Marcus's direction before making his way to his usual corner table. Marcus felt a faint warmth spread across his chest. He didn't know exactly why, but seeing Richard each morning had begun to feel like a small reassurance, something steady in a life full of uncertain pieces. He carried over the plate toast, already cut neatly into squares, and placed it gently in front of Richard. "Morning," Marcus said. Richard's gaze drifted to the plate, then back up to Marcus. "You cut it a bit smaller today." "I noticed you had trouble yesterday," Marcus replied softly. Richard paused, almost studying him. "You notice a lot." "Sometimes," Marcus murmured. "Just want to make mornings easier." Richard's hands rested near the fork, the fingers slightly curled. "Not many people do that anymore." "Do what notice?" His voice had a heaviness to it, like the word carried more weight than its letters. Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. For a moment, silence settled between them. Not cold, not awkward, just still. The kind of stillness that happens when two people understand each other without needing much explanation. Richard picked up his fork. "Thank you." After a moment, Marcus nodded and returned to work. But the rest of the morning carried a different energy, soft, warm, like someone had cracked a door open and let a bit of sunlight slip through. The following days continued their slow, consistent rhythm, but the small shifts kept happening. One morning after Marcus delivered the plate, Richard cleared his throat and asked, "Your son, Sam, is it?" Marcus blinked. He hadn't expected the question so suddenly. "Yes, Sam. He's 7.5, Marcus said with a slight laugh. "He'd correct you on that." Richard let out a soft breath, almost a laugh himself. "Does he still like superheroes?" A small jolt went through Marcus. "How did you?" "You mentioned it once," Richard replied quietly. "Something about him drawing you as one." Marcus looked down at his hand, surprised that Richard remembered. "Yeah, he draws me wearing a cape, but I keep telling him I'm just a regular guy." "Most superheroes are," Richard said, eyes lowered. "Regular people who keep going." The words hit Marcus deeper than he expected. He swallowed, suddenly unable to look away. "Must be hard working these hours," Richard added, raising him alone. "It is sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but he's my kid. I'd do anything for him." Richard nodded slowly. "That's clear." Then he looked up fully and said in a soft voice that cracked just a little, "You're a good father." Marcus felt his breath catch. His chest tightened, the kind of tightness that wasn't painful, but was too strong to ignore. He hadn't heard those words in years, maybe never. Jessica had said many things before she left, but never that. He turned slightly so his coworkers wouldn't see him blink too quickly. "Well, thanks," he said, throat rough. Richard didn't speak again for several minutes. He simply ate quietly, his shoulders relaxed in a way Marcus rarely saw. But those 4 words stayed with Marcus the whole day. They followed him home into the kitchen, where he boiled pasta for dinner, into the small bedroom, where Sam painted a dragon breathing blue flames. They echoed again when Marcus tucked the inhaler under Sam's pillow just in case, and again when he sat alone at the kitchen table, folding bills he couldn't pay. "You're a good father." He repeated the words silently until sleep finally found him. On Saturday morning, the sky was a clear, pale blue, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming winter. Marcus breathed it in deeply as he walked from his car to the cafe door. But today came with a complication. His phone buzzed at 5:08 a.m. with a message from the babysitter. "Sorry, Marcus, I'm sick. Can't watch Sam today." He stared at the message for several seconds, feeling that familiar knot of panic wind through his stomach. Saturdays were busy. He couldn't risk being short-staffed or distracted, but he had no one else to call, not at this hour, not on such short notice. He looked through the doorway of Sam's small bedroom at the sleeping boy. His blanket was twisted around his legs, and he clutched a half-colored picture of Spider-Man in one hand. Marcus sighed gently. "All right, buddy, looks like you're coming with me today." He slipped Sam's coat on him carefully, making sure not to wake him too fast. Sam blinked awake in the car, rubbing his eyes. "We going to the cafe?" he asked, voice raspy with sleep. "Yeah," Marcus said softly, "just for today. Bring your coloring book." Sam nodded, too tired to question it. When they entered the cafe, the lights clicked on with a warm glow. Sam yawned and climbed onto a stool at the counter. Marcus poured him a small cup of warm milk from the steamer, Sam's version of coffee, and set it in front of him. Sam's small hands wrapped around the cup, soaking up the heat. "Try to stay where I can see you," Marcus said gently. "I will," Sam promised, already pulling out his crayons. Tony arrived soon after and raised his eyebrows. What's the kid doing here?" Babysitter bailed, Marcus explained quietly. "I didn't have a choice." Tony sighed dramatically. Just keep him out of the way. Boss'll freak if anything gets broken. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, but kept his tone even. He'll be fine. He'll just sit and draw. Peter entered a few minutes later and gave Sam a small wave. Morning, champ. Sam smiled shyly. Hi, Mr. Peter. Marcus glanced at the clock. 7:07 a.m., 8 minutes until Richard. He moved quickly, prepping the corner table, setting out the silverware, neatly arranging the plate, warming on the pass. At 7:15, exactly, the door chimed. Richard stepped inside, brushing off a few leaves caught in his coat from the wind outside. He took 2 steps, then paused. His eyes drifted toward the counter where Sam sat, feet not reaching the floor, coloring Spider-Man in bright blue instead of red. Richard blinked once, then again, as if something inside him shifted. Marcus approached with a cautious smile. Morning, Mr. Lancaster. Richard nodded, but his gaze drifted back to Sam. Your boy, yeah, Marcus said. Babysitter canceled. He'll keep to himself. Richard didn't answer. He simply watched the child for a moment longer. Then he walked not to his usual corner table, but toward Sam. The boy looked up as the older man approached. May I? Richard asked, motioning to the seat beside him. Sam, surprised, nodded. Sure. Richard sat slowly, placing his hat on the counter. He pointed at the drawing. Spider-Man looks different. Sam giggled. I wanted to make him special. I see, Richard said softly. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, unsure if he should step in. But Sam looked relaxed, and Richard, who rarely spoke more than a handful of words, seemed almost peaceful. Marcus returned to the kitchen, slowly watching them carefully. Sam flipped the page and showed Richard another drawing, this one of a man wearing a cape lifting a car with one hand. That's my dad, Sam said proudly. He's a superhero. Marcus felt his breath hitch as he overheard from a few feet away. Richard leaned forward, studying the drawing with a seriousness that made Sam beam. He must be very strong, Richard murmured. He is, Sam said. He works a lot, but he always comes home. And he makes pasta better than anyone. Richard's mouth twitched, almost a smile. A real one. Marcus swallowed hard and pretended to be checking the griddle. For nearly 2 hours, something extraordinary unfolded at that counter. Richard, who barely spoke to anyone, asked Sam questions about school superheroes, dragons, and what he wanted to be when he grew up. Sam, unfiltered and bright, answered every question with enthusiasm. When Sam asked, "Did you ever have kids?" a shadow passed over Richard's face. He looked down, fingers curling. "Yes," he said quietly. "I had a son and a grandson." Sam waited, sensing something he couldn't name. "They're gone now," Richard added, voice barely above a whisper. Sam reached out and touched Richard's sleeve gently. "I'm sorry." Richard blinked hard. The kindness in that small gesture, the unthinking purity of it, softened him in a way Marcus had never seen. "You're a good boy," Richard said softly. "A very good boy." Marcus felt his eyes sting again as he leaned against the doorway of the kitchen. Before leaving that morning, Richard placed a light hand on Sam's shoulder and said, "Would you like to learn a game next week?" Sam's eyes lit up. Really, Richard said. "I'll bring my set." Monday came with a heavy sky, the kind of sky that made the early morning look darker than usual, the clouds low and swollen. On the drive to the cafe, Sam sat in the back seat with his chess book open on his lap, humming quietly. Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and worry. Pride because Sam was excited, worry because Tony and Peter hadn't been thrilled about Sam being there on Saturday. Dad, Sam asked, "Do you think Mr. Richard will teach me today?" "Yeah," Marcus said gently. He said he would. They walked into the cafe together, the bell chiming softly. Marcus set Sam at the same small table and started preparing Richard's usual plate toast, cut into perfect squares, steam rising gently from the bacon. 7:15 approached. Marcus kept glancing at the door. The minute passed. "Maybe he's late," Sam said quietly. Marcus nodded, though something inside him tightened. Maybe. By 7:30, Marcus had reheated the plate once. By 8:00, the food sat cold again. Sam kept looking at the door, his small hands folded on the counter. "Dad, is he coming?" Marcus swallowed. "He might be busy." 8:10. The coin didn't appear. The corner table stayed empty. The chair stayed perfectly still. Marcus cleared the cold plate, slowly feeling the weight of it in his hands. He knelt beside Sam. "Hey, buddy, we might not see him today." Sam's voice was soft, but he promised. Marcus rubbed his shoulder. "Sometimes things happen that we don't expect." Sam nodded, but his eyes dropped to the table. He didn't say another word. Marcus stared at the empty corner, a deep ache settling in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it. He just didn't know how wrong yet. And the world, in its quiet, unforgiving way, was about to tell him. The cafe felt quieter than usual on that heavy Monday morning, even though customers filled most of the tables. The emptiness came from a single vacant chair in the corner, a chair Marcus kept glancing at each time he passed through the dining room. It was as if the absence of one man had carved a hollow space into the morning itself. The light from the window looked dimmer. The hum of conversation sounded muted. The scent of bacon and coffee drifted through the room, but it seemed thin, like something essential was missing from the air. Sam sat at his small table tapping a crayon against the page, but not coloring. Every so often he looked toward the cafe door with a hopefulness that made Marcus's chest ache. The chessbook lay open in front of him, showing a black and white diagram of a simple endgame. A drawing of a rook had been neatly outlined in red crayon, though Sam hadn't filled it in yet. Maybe he overslept. Sam murmured. The words were soft, as if he wasn't sure he believed them. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe. But Marcus didn't believe it, not for a moment. Richard was many things: quiet, stiff, distant, but he wasn't unpredictable. Not once in all the months Marcus had known him had Richard missed a morning. Not one. A tightening sensation began at the base of Marcus's throat and moved down to settle in his chest, like a weight. Tony wiped down a nearby table, watching Marcus from the corner of his eye. Still no sign of the old guy. No Marcus answered. Hey, Tony said with a shrug. Maybe he finally took a vacation. Marcus shot him a look. He's not that type. Tony raised his hands. Just saying. Peter, stacking plates near the dishwasher, chimed in. People skip a day sometimes. Doesn't mean anything. But it did. Marcus felt it in his bones. Something was wrong. He tried to push it aside as he carried plates, poured coffee, and took orders. The cafe stayed busy through the morning rush, but the uneasiness never left him. Every time he heard the front door chime, Marcus's heart quickened, hoping it would be Richard. It never was. As the clock approached 9, the cafe finally quieted. The last of the morning crowd left, and the place felt strangely empty, despite the chairs and tables still in place. Marcus wiped his hands on a towel, took a slow breath, and stepped toward Sam. Hey, buddy, he said softly, crouching down to eye level. Maybe we'll see him tomorrow. Sam's lower lip trembled, but he said he'd come today. Marcus smoothed Sam's hair. I know. And he meant it. Something must have come up. Sam nodded but didn't look convinced. He stared down at the chessbook again and traced the outline of a pawn with his finger. The door chime rang behind them. Marcus stood hopeful despite himself. For a moment, he thought No wished it was Richard. Instead, 4 men in dark suits entered the cafe. They didn't belong here, at least not in this place of scuffed floors, chipped booths, and handwritten specials. Their freshly polished shoes, crisp ironed collars, and matching black coats made them look like they had stepped out of an expensive commercial or a courthouse hallway. They paused near the entrance, scanning the room. Behind them walked an older man in a tailored gray suit, carrying a neat leather briefcase. His hair was silver, combed back with careful precision, and his eyes were sharp, searching. The cafe went quiet in a way it hadn't all morning. Tony whispered to Peter, "We getting audited or something?" "No idea," Peter whispered back. The older man stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly on the tile floor. He stopped near the center of the cafe and looked around as if expecting someone to rise and greet him. "Excuse me," he said in a calm, professional tone. "Is there a Mr. Marcus Rodriguez here?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. "That's me," he said cautiously, wiping his hands on his apron as he stepped forward. "Can I help you?" The man nodded once. "My name is Philip Anderson. I'm an attorney. I need to speak with you privately if possible." Marcus stiffened. His first thought was bills. Debt collectors. Some missed payment he hadn't even realized he missed. "Is something wrong?" Marcus asked. Anderson's expression softened just barely. "Yes, I'm afraid there is." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Marcus steadied himself with a hand on the back of a nearby chair. To avoid speculation, Anderson continued, "We should step aside." But Sam stepped forward, small hand gripping the edge of Marcus's apron. His eyes were wide, anxious. Marcus swallowed. "My son can stay." Anderson studied the boy for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." They walked toward a quiet booth near the back, away from the remaining customers. The 4 suited men stood near the entrance, still and silent, like a protective barrier. Marcus slid into one side of the booth. Sam sat close beside him, legs dangling off the seat. Anderson sat across from them, placing the briefcase gently on the table. Marcus felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The hum of the cafe seemed distant now, muted beneath the growing silence of anticipation. Anderson opened the briefcase with a soft click and removed a folder. "I apologize for coming unannounced," he said, "but this matter is both urgent and sensitive." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure if he trusted his own voice. Anderson folded his hands. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm very sorry to inform you that Richard Lancaster passed away yesterday evening." Marcus froze. He didn't hear anything for a moment. Not the griddle in the kitchen, not Tony talking in the back, not the clatter of dishes. Just silence. He blinked. "What?" Anderson repeated gently. "Mr. Lancaster passed away on Sunday night." The words sank in like stones dropping through deep water. Sam looked up at Marcus, waiting for him to say something that made sense. "But he was fine," Marcus finally whispered. "He was here on Saturday. He was talking. He was laughing." Anderson gave a small nod. "I understand. According to the medical report, he experienced a cardiac event in his home. It was quick." Marcus's breath hitched. He felt the air leave his lungs in one sharp exhale, and his vision blurred for a moment. He saw Richard's hands trembling over the fork. He saw him leaning forward to study Sam's drawing. He saw that gentle, rare smile. He saw his promise next Saturday. "Chess." Sam's voice broke through like a small crack in glass. "So, he can't come back?" Sam asked softly. Marcus pulled him close, pressing a hand to the back of his son's head. Anderson's voice was low, steady. "I'm afraid not." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut briefly, trying to keep himself composed. His throat burned. His hands shook. He felt grief rise up like a sudden tide. He had known Richard for months quietly, simply through small gestures and exchanges. They weren't friends in the usual sense. They hadn't shared stories over drinks or spent holidays together, but there had been something real between them. Something steady, meaningful, built through routine and kindness. And now it was gone. Sam's voice trembled, but he said he'd teach me chess. Marcus hugged him tighter, feeling the boy's small shoulders shake. "I know, buddy," he whispered. "I know." Anderson waited, giving them a moment. Then he spoke softly. "I understand this is difficult, but Mr. Lancaster left very specific instructions regarding the two of you." Marcus looked up confused. "What do you mean instructions in his will?" Anderson clarified. "He named you and your son explicitly." Marcus stared at him. "In his will," he repeated, almost disbelieving. "Yes," Anderson said, in very detailed terms. Marcus glanced toward the empty corner table. He saw the last plate he'd prepared for Richard still sitting near the warmer's toast, cut into careful squares. He swallowed hard. Why? Why would he name us Anderson, opened the folder, and pulled out a single sheet of paper? "Before we go into details, Mr. Lancaster requested that you be brought to Peterson and Associates immediately upon notification." Immediately, Marcus asked. "Today, yes, today." Marcus looked down at his apron, still dusted with flour. "I'm working. I'm aware this is unusual," Anderson said with a nod. "But Mr. Lancaster left very clear, legally binding instructions. He said it was important." Marcus took a long breath. His hands felt cold and numb. Sam looked at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are we in trouble?" "No," Anderson said gently. "You're not in trouble. None of this is trouble." He leaned forward slightly. "It's something else." Marcus didn't know what that meant. He wasn't sure he could even process anything right now. His mind kept replaying Richard's promise, his smile, his kindness, the sound of his voice saying, "You're a good father." The chair in the corner looked impossibly empty. Anderson closed the folder. "If you're able, we should go now." Marcus hesitated. Tony called from the back. "Everything all right over there?" Marcus swallowed once, twice. "Yeah," he called back hoarsely. "Just something important." He looked at Sam. The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve and waited quietly. Marcus turned back to Anderson. "Okay," he said. "We'll go." And the moment he spoke the words, the weight of the morning shifted, subtle but undeniable, carrying him into a future he never could have imagined. The morning after the will reading felt unreal, as if Marcus had stepped into a life that didn't quite fit him yet. He woke before the alarm, sitting on the edge of his bed, in a room that looked exactly the same as it always had, paint peeling a little near the windowsill. A stack of bills on the dresser, Sam's school drawings taped crookedly to the wall. But something inside him felt different, unsettled, like the world had shifted its weight onto a new balance point. He rubbed his face with both hands and let out a breath that came from somewhere deep in his chest. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle rhythm of Sam sleeping in the next room. He stood and walked quietly to Sam's door. The boy was sprawled across the bed, one leg kicked outside the blanket, his small hand still resting on the chess book he'd fallen asleep reading. The book lay open to a page showing the starting formation of the pieces, neat rows of pawns, the king and queen in their places. Marcus watched him for a long moment. "I'm gonna make this right," he whispered, though Sam couldn't hear him. "For both of us." He let Sam sleep while he brewed a small pot of coffee in the kitchen. The aroma filled the apartment warm and familiar in a way that felt grounding. He poured himself a cup, leaning against the counter, letting the warmth rest in his palms as he stared at the morning light filtering through the blinds. Richard was gone, but Richard had also left something behind, something bigger than money, bigger than the cafe, bigger than any of the numbers that had been read yesterday in that towering office. He'd left trust, and he'd left a mission, and he'd left the quiet reminder that small kindnesses matter enough to shape entire futures. Marcus took a slow sip. The coffee tasted different today, not better, just sharper somehow. Like he was tasting it for the first time. Later that morning, after waking Sam after making toast and packing school lunch after dropping him off with a tight hug and a whispered, "Have a good day, buddy," Marcus drove to the bank with Anderson's documents sitting on the passenger seat, neatly clipped in a manila folder. He still couldn't believe any of this was real. Inside the bank, he sat across from a representative who spoke kindly, but formally guiding him through the account transfers, explaining each page slowly, so Marcus didn't feel overwhelmed. Marcus signed where needed, his hands steady, but his heart racing. Once the transactions were complete, the representative handed him a printed summary inside a thick envelope. "Congratulations, Mr. Rodriguez," she said gently, "and please accept our condolences for your friend's passing." "Thank you," he said, voice soft. When he stepped back into the crisp morning air, he didn't feel triumphant or excited. He felt humbled, overwhelmed, and strangely quiet inside. He walked to his car slowly, as if any quick movement would break the fragile stillness around him. He placed the envelope on the passenger seat beside the folder and rested his hand on both. "Thank you, Richard," he whispered. By the afternoon, he had paid every debt he owed. Each one felt like a brick lifted from his chest. Credit cards, medical bills, overdue rent, a garnished paycheck from years ago that still haunted him. All gone. The screen on his phone confirmed payments in green letters that looked almost unreal. He sat back in his chair at the kitchen table, exhaling deeply. For the first time in years, he could breathe. Sam came home from school later that day, backpack bouncing against his shoulders as he ran inside. Dad, did anything happen today?" Marcus pulled him into a hug. "Yeah, buddy. Something big happened." "What is it?" Marcus knelt down so their eyes met. "We don't have to worry anymore. Not about bills, not about losing the apartment, not about anything like that." Sam blinked. Really, Marcus said, smiling. "Mr. Richard helped us. A lot." Sam pressed his face into Marcus's chest, hugging him tightly. "I miss him." "I know," Marcus whispered, kissing the top of his head. "I do too." The next morning, Marcus returned to Street Cafe this time, not in uniform, not with an apron, but carrying a folder in a sense of responsibility that felt both heavy and good. Tony was already there, wiping down the counter in a dazed sort of way. "Hey man," Tony said, "what are you doing here? You're not on schedule. After yesterday." I thought Marcus smiled gently. "I'm here because I need to talk to everyone." Peter poked his head out from the back. About what Marcus walked behind the counter, not with the nervousness of an employee, but with the quiet steadiness of someone carrying a purpose. "About the cafe," Marcus said simply. "I own it now." The silence that followed felt almost funny in its awkwardness. Tony blinked at him like he hadn't heard right. Peter let a dish slip from his hands into the sink with a clatter, what Tony finally choked out. "How, it's a long story," Marcus said. "But yes, I'm the new owner." Tony sat down heavily on a stool. "This place, our place." "You," Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess so." Peter leaned forward on the counter. "So what happens to us?" "You keep your jobs," Marcus said immediately. "All of you. No one's losing anything." Tony blinked again. Really? Actually, everyone's getting a raise." Peter's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? As serious as can be," Marcus said. Tony put a hand over his chest dramatically. "Man, I need to sit down again." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "You're already sitting." The tension broke. Tony and Peter's laughter filled the cafe, a warmth the building hadn't felt in years, a feeling of possibility. Marcus looked around, imagining what Richard might say, what Margaret might have said, what this cafe could become. He felt the first stir of pride. In the days that followed, Marcus met with contractors to fix the heating system that had limped along for years. He ordered a new coffee machine, one that didn't hiss and rattle like an old steam engine. He spoke to the staff about scheduling changes that would give everyone more balanced hours. He even added a small bin of free fruit near the entrance with a handwritten sign, "Take one if you're hungry. No questions, no cost." Marcus customers noticed. Regulars smiled. New customers wandered in because they heard some guy bought the place and fixed the air conditioning. But something was still missing. On Friday afternoon, a courier delivered an envelope to Marcus at the cafe. Inside was a brass key and a handwritten note in Richard's neat, careful script. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here. Please use the key. It will explain everything I couldn't say aloud." Richard Marcus swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he held the key. "Everything all right?" Peter asked from the counter. "Yeah," Marcus said softly. I think I need to go somewhere." Later that evening, after closing the cafe early, Marcus drove downtown to an address printed at the bottom of the note. It was an older apartment building, not large, not glamorous, but well-maintained. The lobby smelled faintly of wood polish and old books. He rode the elevator to the top floor. The hallway was quiet, lined with framed pictures of the city from decades past. At the end of the corridor, he found the door with a brass lock. He slipped the key in slowly. The door opened with a soft click. The apartment was dim, lit only by the fading evening light that filtered through the large windows. Dust motes drifted in the beams of light like tiny stars. The air smelled faintly of cedar and paper. Marcus stepped in carefully, almost reverently. The living room was simple, but warm bookshelves framed photographs, a worn leather chair by the window, the kind of chair a man would sit in for decades. On a small table near the chair rested a single-frame photo of a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. "Margaret." Marcus approached it slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of the frame. "She looks kind," he whispered. Next to the photo sat a small wooden box. Marcus opened it and found old letters, recipes, a menu from a place called Maggie's Table, and a worn chess piece, a king smooth from years of handling. His throat tightened. He imagined Richard sitting here reliving memories, missing her, missing his son, missing his grandson, coming to Street Cafe because he needed somewhere to sit quietly and not be alone. Marcus sank into the chair. His hands rested in his lap, fingers curling slightly. "I wish I'd talked to you more," he murmured. "I wish you'd told me about all this." But maybe Richard had known words would never be enough. Maybe he'd wanted Marcus to understand the way he had lived, with kindness, quiet, but unwavering. The apartment felt like a message left behind, a whisper, a guiding hand. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him. Weeks passed, and the cafe continued improving slowly, steadily. Customers noticed. Some left little notes of thanks. Others complimented the warmer atmosphere, the better service, the comfortable air conditioning. The corner table, Richard's table, remained untouched. Marcus had placed a small brass plaque above it that read, "In memory of Richard Lancaster, a quiet heart, a kind soul." And beside the plaque hung a framed photograph Sam had drawn, a simple picture of Richard smiling gently as he watched Sam draw. The first time Marcus saw a customer pause to read the plaque, he felt his chest warm, with something like pride and sorrow intertwined. But the peace didn't last long. One morning, Anderson arrived at the cafe with a folder tucked neatly under his arm. "Justin is preparing to challenge the will," he said after Marcus invited him to sit. "He intends to call a special shareholder meeting." Marcus swallowed. "Does this mean he can take everything back?" "No," Anderson said calmly, "but it does mean you'll have to defend what Richard left you." Marcus sat back, exhaling slowly. "I don't know how to do that. I'm just a cafe guy." Anderson gave him a small, knowing smile. So was Richard's wife. So were plenty of the people who built their lives with honest work. "You'll do fine." Marcus didn't feel fine, but he nodded. "Tell me what I need to do," he said quietly. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, documents, business terms Marcus had never heard before, and late-night sessions where he pored over Richard's notes. Sam sat nearby during these nights, coloring or reading comics, while Marcus learned about board structures, fiduciary responsibilities, profit allocations. He wasn't trying to become a businessman. He was trying to protect what Richard had trusted him with. Sam noticed the stress. "Dad," he asked one night, tugging Marcus's sleeve, "why do you look tired?" Marcus exhaled. "Just a lot going on, buddy." "Mr. Richard picked you for a reason," Sam said simply. "You can do it." The words settled in Marcus's chest, warm and steady. "Thanks," he whispered. "I needed that." The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived with a sky heavy with clouds. Marcus dressed in his best shirt, the one he saved for school events and doctor's appointments. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and neatly pressed. Sam helped him adjust the collar. "You look like a hero," he said matter-of-factly. Marcus smiled. "Let's hope I act like one." At the towering glass building downtown, Marcus felt tiny again, like he had on the day of the will reading. But this time he walked inside with his shoulders straighter. Inside the boardroom, Justin smirked the moment Marcus entered. "Well, well," Justin said. "The diner boy." Marcus didn't respond. He sat down quietly, gripping the single-share certificate Richard had left him. The meeting began. Justin made his proposal first to take control of the company, to streamline operations, to phase out community investments. His words were smooth practiced. Then Anderson stood. "Mr. Rodriguez would like to speak." Marcus rose slowly, the room's eyes on him. His heart pounded, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I don't know much about business," he began, "but I know what kind of man Richard was. I knew him through small things, quiet mornings, a plate of toast. A few people shifted in their seats, listening more closely. I watched him struggle with his hands. I watched him sit alone. I watched people ignore him. But I saw him. And he saw me." He took a breath. "Richard didn't leave me anything because he thought I was special. He left it because he believed kindness matters, that it should guide how we treat people, how we run businesses, how we live." He reached into the folder and pulled out the documents Richard had prepared. And he didn't trust his grandson to do that. Murmurs surged through the room as Marcus read aloud the records of Justin's gambling debts, his failed projects, his cover-ups. Justin jumped to his feet. "This is ridiculous. He has no idea." But the board was already turning. People whispered. Eyes narrowed. Marcus continued, voice quiet but firm. "I'm proposing an amendment to use 10% of the company's profits to fund community cafes, shelters, and food programs. Places like this one," he said, holding up a menu for Maggie's table. Silence. Then an older board member stood. "I knew Margaret," the man said softly. "This is exactly what she would have wanted." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Thank you," he whispered. The vote was cast. Justin lost. Marcus's amendment passed. A wave of quiet relief washed over him. Richard's legacy would continue not in boardrooms, but in people. Months later, Street Cafe had changed in small but meaningful ways. The walls were freshly painted. The air was cool and clean. Customers smiled as they entered. Tony managed the place with newfound pride. Peter greeted regulars by name. And in the corner, Richard's table remained untouched except for the chess set Marcus brought from Richard's apartment. One afternoon, as golden light streamed through the windows, Marcus sat with Sam at Richard's corner. The chess pieces were arranged neatly between them. "You ready?" Marcus asked. Sam grinned. "Ready." Marcus moved a pawn forward. "Your turn." Sam moved his knight with surprising care. As they played, the cafe filled with the soft sounds of life dishes, clinking quiet conversation, the hiss of the new espresso machine. Marcus looked at the chess set, at Sam's small hands, at the plaque on the wall. He felt peace move through him, like a slow, warm tide. Richard had kept part of his promise. Now Marcus would keep the rest. Sam looked up. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy, I think Mr. Richard would be proud." Marcus's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think so too." Outside, the sun dipped slowly, painting the street in shades of amber and gold. And inside the cafe, once a prison, now a home, a man and his son leaned over a chessboard, the legacy of kindness alive in every quiet move. The world around them hummed with simple warmth, and the memory of a quiet old man lived on in every small act that followed. A legacy, not of money, not of power, but of kindness passed forward piece by piece like a gentle game of chess.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.